Hi, this is Claudia Filos with the Center for Atlantic Studies, and we're here today to have a conversation with Professor Laura Slatkin of NYU University. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's an honor. Thank you.
Um, so I'd like to share just a few words about just about your background. So you currently teach at NYU, but before that, you also taught at the University of California at Santa Cruz, at Yale, at Columbia, at the University of Chicago. You are an award-winning teacher. Your research interests include ancient Greek and Roman poetry, wisdom traditions in classical and Near Eastern antiquity, gender studies, anthropological approaches to the literature of the ancient Mediterranean world, and cultural poetics. Um, you know, we
It
could go
sounds
on
like
talking about
it
your
sounds like it sounds like a job application CV.
okay. Well, I just want to let people know just a sense of sort of your intellectual approach to the literature that we're going to talk about today, and your wide area of expertise. Today, we're joined by many dear members of our community. Some are familiar faces, some are not yet familiar faces, but I'm sure they will be. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I hope that they'll introduce themselves when they have a chance to speak. So, Laura, I'd like to just get started on our topic today. Can you talk a little bit about why you're interested in tragic visualizing in the Iliad?
Well, I think the way I came to this was wanting to look at the way the Iliad does a kind of challenging thing, which is that it both asserts the values that the heroes are attached to, like Kleos, of which Greg Nage is the great singer in our century, the Iliad also signals its own limits, the things that glory doesn't recuperate and doesn't answer to. And in that way, I was trying to look at the way other genres emerge out of epic, and tragedy in particular. So it was partly about how the Iliad makes evident to us its interface with other genres, and how other genres are sort of move out of what the Iliad offers us. So I can say more about that, but this was how I came to look at that. And so the question of what is visualizable, what is sort of beyond the vision of the poem and the vision of its characters and so forth. Then I became, interested in questions of who within the poem, how people see differently. It's the sort of the metaphysics of vision, what human beings can see, what the gods can see when your vision is occluded, when things are transparent. I watched some of the wonderful talk that Simi Ali gave about the cloud of Iliad 14 and so forth. So these kinds of things where the poem is interested in the problems of seeing. That was one route into this whole question.
Beautiful.
So, and
So,
I mean, just to say, in thinking about the business of the limits of epic and what Kleos doesn't, as it were, answer to, this was something that, in a sense, emerged out of this exploration of Thetis, of the lamenting mother, the mother who can't save her child, and so forth. So these things had a certain kind of through line, even though it's not always an absolutely straight line, but it sort of emerged from that.
Beautiful. So, Laura, I know you selected some focus passages for our discussion today. Is there a passage that maybe we might start with to get an idea? We might invite a member of our community to read one of these passages, and then we could discuss one.
Yes, I mean, I think the one of the things that I mean, the Iliad actually draws attention to places um, where there's a kind of problem of vision, and so this partly arises when the gods are there. How do you see them or not see them? What do they look like? What does it mean to see them and so forth? This is one of the. How do you distinguish? How can you tell the difference? People are always, or here and there, wondering whether somebody is. This wonderful passage in the Odyssey in which Telemachus, claps eyes on Odysseus and says, "Oh, you're so," Odysseus, transformed and so on. And Telemachus says, "Oh, you're so, astonishing. Are you a god?" This is every father's dream, that his son thinks he's a god. But the question is, how can you tell? And this is a problem that the Odyssey is interested in a way that turns out to be, in a sense, comic. That is, how do you know whether it's a man or a god trying to get into your bed? This is, Penelope doesn't want to be seduced by somebody who's pretending to be Odysseus, but maybe isn't Odysseus. So this is why he has to tell her about the bed. But the Iliad is interested in this in a different register. Because the gods intervene in a way. They intervene in the battle locally, and they intervene in the whole, way in which the movement of the poem turns, and so the question is, what happens when a god appears on the battlefield, or as Athena does, and so forth? What does it mean, and what does it mean to be able to see them and not see them, and so on? So this is where these passages that Sarah kindly collated, where this starts with a passage from Iliad 5, 127, where actually Diomedes is given a kind of clearer vision in order to be able to distinguish. So when he goes on his Aristeia, right, when he's launched into this, rampage, he can tell, so that he can tell humans from gods, so that he will, fight with the humans and not with the gods. Of course, he does strike Aphrodite anyway, and that's okay. In this context, he has a kind of permission.
Because he's been given foreknowledge that if she's there, he could strike her, right?
It's okay. She's not going to cause. I mean, she's already done her damage, as it were. So the interesting thing, I think, here is this notion that in some way human vision is always sort of shuttered, and in order to offer clarity, the gods can remove that veil, as it's translated here, the achlus, which is a local, in this moment, let's say, a local instance of that human condition of partial seeing. Partial seeing in the sense that things are hard to distinguish, and partial seeing for humans because they can't see the future, they can't see all around themselves, you know. You can only sort of, um, you can see, you know, this is why in Greek, you know, these adverbs prosthen and opisthen, where prosthen means in the past, and it also means in front of you, and opisthen means in back of you, and in the future, because the Greeks conceive of people as backing into the future, looking at the past. You can't see the future. You can only see the past. So this is, it's, you know, it's like before and before. It's before you, as it were. It's before you. You
That
know.
is so fascinating.
Yeah. So the question so this representation of the human limitation as figured through partial seeing, partial vision, partial understanding. So, and then, you know, one other element in all of this is, and oh yeah, so just to say, you know, this business of the sort of shadow that is the achlus, the shadow, the word achlus in Greek, the sort of shadow that she removes from the eyes of Diomedes. You know, this is also the term for the shadow that covers people's eyes when they die, as the Iliad describes it. You know, a warrior falls and achlus covers his eyes. So it's a sign of mortality that your vision is imperfect. And so that's one thing. But on the other hand, you know, and this was the thing that I was struck by, that verbs of seeing and noticing, this term noase, he caught sight of, is so crucial in these battle scenes. And there's a wonderful book years ago by Bernard Fenwick at the University of Cincinnati, I think he was. And Fenwick did this monograph called Typical Battle Scenes in the Iliad. And what he observed was that in any particular scene that focused on entry into battle, of which there are many, many in the Iliad, and especially, you know, in 13 through 18, but many, the reason that is given for any warrior's entry into battle is that he sees something. He sees a brother or a comrade either wounded or, you know, more likely killed, and he goes into battle in order. He, you know, enters, is described as entering. He saw and he entered the battle in order to either out of an effort to help, or if the warrior is killed, out of pity or out of revenge, out of a desire for revenge. And so, you know, this is given, you know, time after time as the motivating moment for the actual entry into battle. So that, you know, it's not that nobody says in the Iliad, I think my you know, what would you say, my bank account of Kleos is going down and I have to, you know, increase it and go into battle and do something. And nobody says, you know, my spear is getting dull. I mean, you know, the reason that it's given time after time for the entry into, you know, for the moment that somebody goes in and risks his life, is that he sees and he notices, or he sees and he goes in, and he enters. So that somehow that business of awareness, of a kind of awareness, is somehow crucial to the whole warrior, to warrior activity. So it's not, you're not flailing around blindly. You see something and it's an active thing. As pity is active in the Iliad, the wonderful book of Jinyo Kim at Queen's College on pity and the way pity activates the warriors. Question that. There was a question that appeared on the screen.
Oh, yes. So, we do have some questions, and I'd like to open up to that. I just want to highlight a couple of things that you've already brought to our attention, which is that you're talking about the difference between sort of the vision of the hero in battle and also the vision of God. So you're noting a distinction between that. You're noting that sometimes vision is a spur to action, whereas other times, I think in your work you will talk about other moments where it actually is a moment for pause and reflection. And I think it's already interesting what you're pointing out, these distinctions between gods and humans, action and inaction, is that moment when Zeus sees his very beloved son is dying, and what happens then. But so I hope we'll get to that. But first, I'd like to take a question, as you noted. So I think Janet does have a question. I'd like to open up to our community members. We do have some people who are watching live via our live broadcast, and we do have a Q&A feature.
Somebody just put on a question about whether you can. Was it you, Paul? Somebody put out a question about can you only see with your eyes, or is there another way of seeing? And and I think this is. One of the things that has always been puzzling, for example, is the passage. I think it's. Let me just see if it's on these. Among these passages where Hector is said to recognize the scales of Zeus. It's at Hector, so at the point at which the battle is turning, it says Hector recognized. I think it's in A. Recognized the scales of Zeus. Now, does he see something? Or is he actually seeing something, or does it mean it's a kind of? Is it an imaginative? A sort of imaginative grasp of the situation that he sees how things are balancing out, So I think that there are these moments when seeing is not only actually regarding something. I think there are those moments where it's something cognitive that is like seeing but not exactly seeing. So it's a very good question, and really that would be something worth pursuing. But thank you. Yeah.
And in dreams, gods come to your dreams, and your eyes are closed. You're not using your eyes. So.
Entirely. Yes. No. Fair enough. Yes. No. I think that's a great point, and so that would be interesting to think about that. What's the difference between things that come to you in dreams, in the way that, for instance, Penelope has these dreams, in the dream of the geese and so forth.
Yeah.
In the eyes. But there are different, so, I mean, the whole question of perception, so literal and figurative seeing, where, in a way, the figurative seeing is, perceiving in and comprehending in a way that is, can encompass seeing, but is maybe not limited to seeing. One could say something like that. So, I mean, it's the kind of, this is why one wants to talk about a metaphysics of vision, in a way. And I think that that whole, perception really is the sort of larger category. And in the passage that I was interested in Iliad 6, because it's the one, it is this one passage in which Hector, it's the one thing that sort of he can't look at, is this imagined scene of Andromache being dragged away, in the end, when Troy falls, and she'll be dragged away, and she'll, to work at a stranger's loom and so forth. And Hector says, I don't want to see that. May I be dead before I ever perceive, this sight. And so and he gets his wish. He wants to be dead, and he is dead by the time this happens. But there's something about that extension of perception. So it's because he says it's prithesthai, the verb to perceive, and he says he doesn't want to see it, and he doesn't want to hear her cry. He doesn't want to hear her lament. So this is a kind of extension. Lament is a big, prithesthai. Lament is a big topic too, which wonderful Casey Douay has written on so brilliantly, and how lament endures beyond other things that, traces that vanish and so forth. So that's another topic.
Wonderful. I'd like to take this moment to open up to further questions from our community members who are in our discussion. Anyone else have a question or comment about what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, hi Laura, this is Bill Moulton from Petersburg, Alaska.
Hi.
So some of us have been learning a Homeric vocabulary, and so you start with the words that are most common to Iliad and Odyssey. So I think we learned 5 words for say or speak before we learned 1 word for listen. So I'm wondering if you're in studies, you're seeing the same thing. We're emphasizing sight and seeing here, but is there words for show? Do people make the effort to show or get others' attention, or is it just all seeing?
No, it's a great question. I think there's super interesting, because the idea is that what will endure is the telling of things. On the one hand, in another genre, lament, but epic as the narrative that can, that incorporates lament, and it memorializes, and it praises and so forth. And this is all speech or song. So in a way, it's what one thinks about in terms of seeing and the phenomenology of seeing, and as you say, showing, is the way that an oral poem needs to be able to do what we're doing now, and wasn't possible then. That is to say, here, look at this. I can, what is it that you're showing? In other words, the whole, in a sense, what the oral narrative has to do is in some way enact the seeing and being seen. So showing is absolutely a crucial thing. This is, these sort of sites that are both, sites that are astonishing. There's a lot of, there's a little bit about it in this article that Claudia kindly posted, but there's much more, than is in that article that could be, explored. But the whole business in the Iliad of astonishment. I mean, the things that are. So you're saying to somebody who's absorbing and metabolizing all of this just through the ear, you're trying to create a picture of something. You're trying to, and there, it's a performance in which you're partly trying to create images. You're trying to create something, a scene. You're trying to, and so the notion that things are being narrated that are scenes of showing and being shown, that create in themselves a kind of, either they can, they motivate and activate, warrior activities, or there's, and I think this is what Claudia was talking about a little bit earlier, they are these moments of reflection, of astonishment, of, what do we have here? This is, in a way, one of the most affecting ones is, well, one might think of two of them. One is this thing where in book 21, you remember when Achilles captures this kid, Lycon, the son of Priam, and whom 10 days earlier he had captured and sold into slavery. And here's this kid back again because he was ransomed. And Achilles says, in an ironic way, says, well, how astonishing, the dead are alive again. I thought I got rid of him, and now here he is again. So that's an irony of that astonishment. But then he says to Lycon, look at me. Look at me. Do you see how great I am? How magnificent? And I'm the son of a goddess, and so forth. Do you see this? But even I have my Moira Krataye, my powerful destiny. My death is going to come too, and one of these days I'm going to die. So don't make such a fuss about about the fact that I'm going to kill you, because even I. So this sort of showing of himself in this way that is both. So this is the Iliad is so astonishing. It both shows the how titanic Achilles is, but in the same moment he's saying, here's how vulnerable I am. I'm going to die too. I'm this big guy, and I'm going to die too. So why are you making such a fuss? So that's one passage, and another passage is, this very affecting book 24 passage where Achilles and Priam, are sort of floored, looking at each other, astonished, because here's Priam, here's the old, the old bereaved father, who's crossed the plain of Troy in the middle of the night, and presented himself to the guy who has killed so many of his children and so forth. So Achilles looks at him with bombos, astonishment. And Priam looks at Achilles with astonishment, and it's that mutual, regard, sort of mutual beholding, and the sort of showing of something and the being shown that creates, the possibility for, that not only creates, but it sort of frames and highlights that exchange that they have. In other words, the narrative doesn't just say, Priam walked in and Achilles sat there and Priam said X. there's this huge sort of framing of the thing as this moment of sort of flabbergasted seeing, and there's even a simile of seeing. Usually you get similes of running or hunting or this or that. It's a simile in which the tenor and the vehicle are about seeing and being seen. Right? So that it's a huge, in a way, setting up of what is this, extraordinary, to say the least, unprecedented and never to be repeated, as it were, moment between these enemies. So, but it's a very, I think Bill is offering a useful refinement on this business. So thank you.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful response, and I love the way you're pointing us both towards the limits of seeing. Like you're saying, Achilles saying, look at me, even as wondrous as I am, there's a limit to me, right, to this wondrous vision, and at the same time, vision can be this instrument that can find the way forward, even in these moments where it seems there should be no way forward. This meeting between Achilles and Priam. That's such a beautiful moment in your paper.
That's a great way.
It was really, well, no, it was very moving in your paper. So do we have any more questions so far on viewing and seeing? Jackie, is that a hand?
Yeah. I hope you're all prepared to write a collaborative paper with me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, you're on. This is before witnesses.
Yes, more seeing. Yes, Jackie, go ahead.
I had a lot of the talk, and Janet, and I'm struck by the dynamics of seeing, because as you point out, when Zeus is powerlessly watching Sarpedon being killed, but he's a remote observer. He's removed from the action there. At the same time, we've talked about how the gods are intervening, the astonishment, and so there's that seeing the light in that type of vision is cognitively, but it's sort of like Athena and Telemachus. And that's very active, cognitively, incredibly active. The person involved there is totally engaged. But how do these two dynamics of seeing intersect? It seems like the active cognitive one is mainly involved with the gods. And is this what sort of transitions out as the epic moves into tragedy, that you don't get this cognitive involvement, astonishment from the gods as much as it's from more the other characters? I don't know. It just seemed like there's these intersecting lines. I'm not sure how they are put together.
Definitely, you're part of this collaborative article, Jackie.
Oh, okay.
100%. I think you're right to say that's the direction that tragedy moves in. It's a kind of, on my part, it's a sort of generalization, that somebody better, better specialized in tragedy than I could push back on. But that's my sense that, if one thinks about the, the intervention of the gods, for example, in tragedy, where they're represented, there's a, I think it's fair to say that they don't share that that kind of what you were describing as kind of engaged seeing. I mean, is that fair to say? I mean, somebody can argue with this here and now, and if I'm missing something, but just sort of thinking about how this works in tragedy. I think that all of that really is is in the human dimension. In all of that kind of effective seeing, as it were, or a certain that effective cognition, is really in the human dimension and not in the divine dimension. Somebody is going to, from a Zeitlin or Helena Foley, are going to come back and correct me, but I think that may be right. But tell me more about how you see that scene of Zeus and Sarpedon.
Well, it just struck me, the word, and I think you used in your article, powerlessly. But at this, and sorrowfully, which you said that's an act of emotion, but powerlessly. And so that in order to be a true observer, one cannot engage. In order to have the scales, be able to be balanced, you cannot be engaged, because to be engaged usually means to take a side or something. So there is a devoid of interaction. Achilles is
you're saying something much more subtle than what I was responding. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's so did I miss the big point you were talking about?
No. You got the point. No. I was sort of moving into some other aspect of tragedy, but I take that point, and I mean, this is it's a little bit like, I mean, I think I mean, if you think about that, I mean, things like that passage in the Iliad where Athena and Poseidon, I guess, is it Athena and Poseidon, who are vultures, and it can't be Poseidon, he can't be a vulture, is it?
Apollo.
Pardon?
Apollo.
Yeah, I thought I was thinking Apollo, but then I thought, yeah, that makes more sense. Where they have this, they're sort of hanging out on these trees and watching the battle, and in some sense, although the Iliad doesn't make this explicit, I mean, vultures don't care which side the bodies fall on, so I think the poem, in a way, moves between the concern of the gods for, I mean, the gods, sort of enter and depart, as things interest them, and it, the poem sort of moves between, these moments of sympathy, as Thetis has for Achilles, or as Hera, has when she sends Athena down in book 1 and so forth. She pity. She feels pity for them and so forth. So it sort of toggles between that and then this, this, as you say, Jackie, this sort of detachment in which, Zeus can say to Hera, okay, well, the next time it's a little bit like Aphrodite and Artemis in Hippolytus. Okay, well, next time, you can, you can sack the city. You can, so in this sort of, entirely impersonal way. So I think that there is a both and, in a sense, in the representation of the gods. This is a thing that Simi Ali is interested in I think, in how whether the Iliad sees the gods as somehow coming to a greater understanding of the human situation and so forth. That's part of her project. She could also chime in and correct me, but I think that's part of it. And she's doing wonderful work. But I think Jackie is connecting this with the business of how the gods look at human beings, if I understand you rightly. I mean, how, so one is the problem of what human beings see, and the other is the problem of what the gods see, for all that they, for all that they, have perfect everything, in theory. And I think, ultimately the question of what the gods are responsible for and not responsible for, which is something that, we've all grappled with, and in teaching these poems, the first thing that students are impressed with, in a way, is how much the gods intervene and how much they are responsible and how, so on and so forth. But I'm not sure that the poems are really committed to that view of things. And, the Odyssey has a wonderful answer to this because, in the opening of the Odyssey, Zeus in the first, council of the gods, and they're talking about Aegisthus, and how he was killed by Orestes, and Zeus says, people always blame the gods for everything, but it's actually through their own atastalia, it's through their own, wackiness that they, that human beings suffer more than they should. So the gods themselves, Zeus could say, look, we've got the power, we're responsible for everything, we do everything. But on the contrary, I mean, the poem has him say, don't blame us. It's I mean, this is on you guys. It's really on the human beings. It's people are over attributing, the responsibility to the gods, and I think that that's a lesson for interpretation of these poems too. So just to say that that the gods are, I mean, there are many things that are in their power, but there are many things that are only in human power. I mean, it's not the gods who cause Achilles to care for Patroclus or be loyal to him. It's not the gods who make any of these people loyal to each other. Sorry, you had something.
No.
Or it's not the gods, Penelope loyal to Odysseus. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
No. I just wanted to let everyone know we have about 12 minutes left. So time is flying, and there's so much more to discuss. And sort of the conversation we're having now about what the gods are capable of and not capable of really draws to mind your work on Thetis. So I was wondering if we could talk very briefly about the power of Thetis and her and the powerlessness of Thetis. And at the same time, I would invite our viewers who are watching the live performance, if you would like to post a question in the Q&A feature on Google+, please feel free to do that, and we'll try to get to one or two of those briefly too before our conversation ends. So Laura, how about Thetis? That's something you've looked at, I think, quite in depth, about the relationship between her power and her powerlessness, and the way that that is depicted in a very ambiguous way in our Iliad.
Yeah, I'm very I'm happy that Thetis is still going strong, at least in the Center for Hellenic Studies.
And yes, everyone should know that they could read this book, The Power of Thetis, and selected essays on the CHS website. It's available, the entire book, every word, beautiful word, for free. So,
well, thank you so much. No, it was just a very thrilling thing to have that published by the Center for Hellenic Studies, and it's published with an article or two. Why did I decide to write on Thetis? That's Bill. Are you asking that? Yeah. Well, I think there were a few problems that I was sort of looking at, and it did seem perplexing that a figure who was apparently so minor, seemed to. I mean, I remember Greg Nage was referring to her as Tinkerbell, and so so why does Tinkerbell, why does she have such a powerful impact on the way this poem plays out? And so I was interested in the mythological background of this figure, and how she, became so generative in a way, and that led me to a couple of things to investigate, and one was theogonic material, and the way in which the Iliad builds, and this is something that Lenny Mullner has done wonderful work on, as he has done wonderful work on many things, and actually something that he did that was very important for my work was a study of prayers, and the sort of mini genre of prayers, and the way in which prayers are, the sort of formal structure of prayers in Greek literature, because the prayer that Achilles asks Thetis to make to Zeus is such an anomalous thing, and so forth. So, and I became aware of that really through Lenny Mullner's work. So the question of what kind of, in a sense, account of cosmic relations is in the background of the Iliad, and so the theogonic material, and particularly succession myth. What happens when you have this pattern of the son greater than his father? What does it produce, and where does it end, and so forth. So I was interested in those interactions, in a way, of theogonic material, and and what were the sort of para-religious aspects of the poem, like prayer and like lament, which Thetis is a gives a version and so forth, or is the exemplar in a certain way of the lamenting mother. So it was a kind of combination of things. but really, I think it was, in terms of what Bill is asking, I think it was a sort of puzzle, like why, what is, what's so important about Thetis that she gets to move the plot of this thing.
Thanks.
And so what did you discover, Laura, in terms of the power, the mixture of her power and her powerlessness? I know you have some very important parallels with the dawn goddess, the Indo-European dawn goddess that you've studied as well, right? And that's part of the mixture.
There are a few of these, these figures, these prototypes, yes, and you get this in Indic mythology and so forth, of these, the female figures who either have mortal lovers like Calypso in the Odyssey, or mortal children, or as with Thetis, both. And this seems, a real. It's a kind of paradigm for the contradictions that the Iliad is interested in. That someone is both. Both has these immortal elements, but is ultimately, irreducibly, constrained by mortality. And the in a way, the business of the succession myth, it's also, there's a sort of psychological verisimilitude, to this. That is, we all think when we're, kids that, we're going to start the world order all over again, until we, bump up against our own limitations and we realize that actually that's not what's going to happen. But it's a kind of, it's a kind of, it's a sort of opportunity for thinking about, what are the greatest of our capacities and what are the most stringent of our limitations, So this is, but the thing, I guess the thing I would finally want to say is that what I am ultimately most interested in is not just the mythological patterns and prototypes, but it is the poem, and it's it is what is the epic that has been that is grounded in this, but that has its distinctive poetics and its distinctive aims and achievements, as a narrative poem. So I'm really, it's not. I'm interested in the mythological and the religious, but it's really the literary. It's really the poetic that is my. That's my ultimately is my commitment, and how the poem offers you this vision of hybridity that is Achilles, and that is, in some ways, any of us, possibly. So it's really in that terrain, in the terrain of the poem, that I think I wanted to really make these suggestions.
So are you saying then that through Achilles, the poetry is leading us to understand both our own power and our own powerlessness? Is that sort of what you're...
Well, Bill is nodding, so I think I'm on good ground here to say yes.
Okay.
Seems to me that the two seem to kind of come, the two subjects we've been talking about seem to come together, because part of what Thetis gives us is that sort of visualization. She does know, because she's a goddess, she does know what Achilles' future is going to be. And that's part of the lament even before his death, isn't it?
Oops, I lost you there.
No, I think Sarah just put herself on mute. Yeah.
There we go. Sarah, I'm sorry, say the last bit again.
So sorry, I meant to mute myself and I hit the camera instead. It's because she's a goddess, she is able to foresee the death of Achilles. And so that's a visualization that she's able to bring together because of his mortality. So that brings the two subjects together that we've been talking about.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, there. That's our collaboration has already started. This is excellent. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And but part of the movement of the poem, the sort of reverse movement of the poem, and people have written about this, and of course, Greg Naj has, done such extraordinary work on it, and for instance, Anne Berggren, who has written about the sort of narrative structure of the poem, the way in which the poem goes in reverse, it sort of goes against its own grain. The whole, teleologically, the poem is, should go, right through to the defeat of the Trojans by the Greeks, but it's turned around for, half of it or more than half of it and so forth. And this is the attempt, this is Thetis's attempt to see something else, as it were, not to see, the death of her son, and this wonderful passage, where Hephaestus says, I can't, and this goes back to Bill's question about showing, the shield, for example, the sort of, what you see, Hephaestus says, I can't protect him from death, but I can give him this beautiful, the spectacular, this spectacular thing to protect himself. So, so there's a kind of, the sort of effort to protect, but in the end, it's Achilles himself who says, I'm done. I'm not going to, I am committed to avenging the death of Patroclus, and so it's that's the, and he has that conversation with Thetis, I'm now don't hold me back anymore. So, okay, I'm taking notes for our collaboration.
You're so kind. You're so kind to encourage us, to help us read these passages more closely. It's 11:02, so unfortunately, I think we need to sign off now. But we can continue our conversation by email in the discussion forums at hour 25. Just a few comments about some of the works you mentioned: Anne Berggren, Leonard Milner, Gregory Naj, the work of all these wonderful scholars. As your work is available on the CHS website. I'm sorry?
Casey Douay is on there.
Casey Douay, yes, Casey Douay. We talked about ideas of visualizing. So Bakker, we have some more from Bakker that's on there that people would be interested in visualizing. Anna Bonifazzi is also interested in those themes. So there's lots to continue reading and talking about. I thank all our community members for joining us.
Simi Ali is
Simi Ali, yes.
Right.
Yes, the wonderful Simi Ali, who is at the center now. She joined us last week. If anyone missed her hangout, you can watch that recorded. And so Sarah's saying that she'll add links to the blog post today to all the works that we mentioned. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everyone. And we'll hope to see everyone very soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Ellen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.